Hey everyone, I'm Umair, and you are watching another podcast of Better Tech. Today we have Igor with us, and we will talk a lot about how to set up distributed teams, how to create inclusive distributed teams, and what are the challenges that we are facing in this current era. But before we start, Igor, how about you take this stage and take a few minutes to introduce yourself?
Perfect. So first, welcome everyone. My name is Igor Sakhnov, and as you might have guessed by my accent, I'm of the Russian descent. I came to the United States, it's hard to believe, a quarter of a century ago.
Okay.
First, I came to United States in Seattle and stuck in Seattle for many years. I worked in the small companies, number of them. None of them went public, so I have to work for a living. For the last 13 years, I've been with Microsoft, and I've done various things at Microsoft, mostly in the identity and authentication stack. I, for example, built the current authentication layer and authorization layer. I worked on the Azure Active Directory aspects for probably close to 10 years now. And in my current role, I own the directory tier and enterprise services for the Azure Active Directory.
Okay, so that's thank you for this introduction. And it seems like you had been doing a lot of deep technical work. But our today's topic is about building teams, inclusive and distributed team. And while we can dive into engineering topics, but I guess people side and management side also comes in. So let's dive into topic. People are always I mean, this age and this COVID era, the distributed teams are being formed and are in vogue all the more. But in order to start any team, I mean, where do it really start? I mean, tell us more about your teams, how they are right now configured, how you have started them, what has changed over time in this COVID era in terms of their distribution and all that.
So first, I would say it seems like an easy problem, right? You just go and hire talent, and then you're very successful because all of a sudden you have people. Life is a bit harder. My first experience with remote teams actually dates back to 90s. End of 90s, I worked for one of the startups that had literally half of the company in Ireland. And it was a very interesting experience because it was quite partitioned. So we literally didn't have to work with each other, which is one of the patterns for the distributed systems, where you separate the ownership of the areas and you go forward with that. The interesting aspect about that company was that Ireland was chosen because of the origins. One of the company founders was of the Irish descent. It was very natural for that person to set up the place in Ireland. Probably a couple of years later, somewhere on the cusp on the 21st century, I actually opened a subsidiary in my hometown. And it was again for the similar reasons of trying to get the extra talent and, to be blunt, going for a much cheaper workforce compared to what it was in United States. Ukraine, that's where my city was at that time, was significantly cheaper. And it was an interesting experience. Both of the efforts were successful. I would say in both of the cases, what I've learned from that time was that cultural ties played a huge difference. Having someone understand the local environment in the other country enabled it significantly to go and be more successful. So I would say that with this experience, it became much easier nowadays to go and start thinking about how we go distributed. And we can touch throughout the interview today on how much distribution my current team has. I think we pretty much cover most of the globe from various models perspective. And it's never one model. That's another thing that I've realized. There are multiple models that you have to apply for different use cases.
Okay, so your experience of using remote teams or offshore teams, or for that matter, distributed team, is way back than the current one. And so seems like you're already kind of prepared for that. But still, I mean, what are the kind of challenges that are faced by leaders or managers, engineers who build these remote team, in terms of processes, in terms of people. What are some of the challenges that you are facing or have faced in the past?
So I think I've touched on one of the aspects, which is always a challenge, which is the cultural differences. To me, that's probably one that make or break the engagement and make or break the geo-dispersed teams. If you cannot figure out the cultural difference, if you cannot build a bridge between all of the places, it becomes a subpar team in my experience. And then people are more or less forced to work with each other versus enjoying working with each other. And that's important. We spend all of our lives at work environment, either virtual or physical. And if you hate coming there, it's not helping anyone, right? There are more pragmatic aspects to that. So let's go to pragmatic problems. Time zones is usually a problem. National regulations and national calendars. And it's funny, but calendars do play a huge role. For example, we observe between our presence in Israel and our presence in China, where there are huge differences in certain aspects of how we get engaged. There are also differences on the established infrastructure. For example, two of the GS centers that we have are in Ireland and Kenya. So in Dublin, Ireland, we focused on the particular aspects of what we wanted to achieve, versus Kenya and Nairobi, we focused on the other aspects. And the difference was very simply driven. If you think about Kenya, infrastructure is not there yet. So I cannot put 24/7 life site expectations on the Kenya team, because they might not have the internet. For what's it worth, they might not have a power at home at the particular points in time. And that drives the differences in the approaches and charters and the areas that teams are going to be covering across the globe.
So infrastructure, time zones, scales, culture, so all come into play. And yes, you talked a couple of times about the culture. So what could be, examples of where cultural mismatch can actually affect the performance of the team? Have you, in your life, you must have gone through some of these such issues. So how the cultures collide, and what can really be done to integrate teams having different culture? Obviously, when you are hiring distributed teams, you are signing up for people coming from different cultures. How to really gel them together? How to make sure they are aligned towards the same goal? And if there are challenges, are there any examples that you can give, and how you can really solve them?
It starts with understanding and listening. By the way, when we talk about cultures, there are multiple pillars to the cultures. We can talk about the personal culture, so that we all come from our upbringing, but then we also can talk about the team culture. What is the team norm is and how the team operates, which gets built over time. If you think about our personal cultures, I'll give you a very simple example. When I first came to United States and I saw someone wearing the Indian national dress, the lady, it struck me. It's formal work environment. I expected everyone to have shorts, not suits, but very close to that. So that came as a cultural difference. And having the open mind and actually understanding and accepting that is very important, because if you don't, it becomes quite interesting. It goes into the, do you want to fit into the established culture, or do you want to be authentic self? Do you want to be able to go and express yourself? And to what degree you can, because at some point, if you're going for a business meeting, you're probably going to be wearing a suit. You're not going to be wearing you're from Pakistan. So I think the Pakistani on my team usually wear sometimes their natural and cultural native clothing. You probably are not going to be doing it in the business meeting with the bank, right? So that's something to understand where the boundaries are, how far we go in one direction, how far we go in the other direction with the personal cultures or origin cultures. Team culture is another aspect. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that, and that there are also ways. I was just talking to some other CEOs, and he was pointing that the way people react to the work, or the people react to a change. So without kind of stereotyping, so he said there's a group of people whenever I tell them something, they said yes, they say yes, and then they don't do it. And then when you ask them, why haven't you done that? They say, oh, this is the reason, that was the reason, etc., etc. But they always say, yes, we can do that. And then there is another geography, let's call them group B. They always start with a no. No, that cannot be done. And then when you start having a discussion with them, and eventually you can convince them that, yes, it can be done. So, I mean, this kind of stuff can also sometimes play a part in terms of how the team dynamics work and how the culture works. I'm not sure if it has ever happened to you or not.
Oh, you are absolutely spot on. And the yes-no cultures, it's actually cultural. And some cultures are also more hierarchy-driven, where you will see more or less submission to the higher level manager, just because that's how culturally was established for the particular group. And understanding when we see that is one thing, and then helping people to appreciate other ways that they understand others is another interesting pivot. You talked about these two interesting peculiarities on the cultures. There is another peculiarity on the culture C, that will always come with the very active arguments that people can go and interpret as fighting and being offensive. But that's how they culturally have grown. And the interesting thing becomes when we bring all of these cultures together, how do we make everyone comfortable? Because it can actually clash quite heavily between the different expectations and cultures, right?
Yeah. So do you think giving feedback helps, or it just offends people when you are talking to different cultures and you're telling them that probably you should not be doing this? I mean, does it offend, or does it make people realize that, yeah, maybe this is not acceptable for other teammates? So how it works, I mean, giving a lot of feedback on culture.
So, in my opinion, first it starts with understanding. Before you give any kind of feedback, I think we need to go and understand what feedback are we given on. And feedback on the culture being offensive is not the right feedback to give. There is no offensive culture. That's the culture. That's how
it's different. It's different. It's neither inferior nor superior. It's just different.
Exactly. And it really goes down to what culture we want to have on the team. So remember, we talked about our own personal cultures as we were growing up, historical cultures, versus the team culture that we are building. And what we are really driving towards is not saying that your culture is bad or good. It's like, this is the culture we want to have on the team. This is what we value on the team. This is how we interact with each other on the team. And it's not from, you need to go and do something different, towards this is what we all want to be doing on the team if we want to be successful. And at the end of the day, one of the interesting aspects, we all talk about diversity and the inclusion, right? That's been a pretty much norm for the conversations for the last, I would say, 10 years. One of the deeper questions to me is question of belonging. Diversity and inclusion is great, but do people actually feel that they belong on the team with all of the differences that they have?
Correct. Now, let's say that you eventually end up having a distributed team and you have navigated the cultural aspects, and now they are a team and they're working as one. So the next step really is how you manage to get a performance out of such a team, which is distributed, which may not be available all the time. So, but how to really gauge, measure, and get a performance of the team that you really don't see in your office every day?
So I would say that the question of performance is more or less universal. At the end of the day, what we are all looking for business impacts. These are the tangible aspects. And we all look at building the culture on the team, which is intangible. And you go and measure both. You set up goals. It starts with the goals. You cannot run the team without clearly established goals. You set up the goals. You set up the way team operates, and it's going to be different. It's never going to be the same for everyone. I remember 20 years ago how we all tried to go and first get into the RAP. Then we try to get into the Scrum. It doesn't work like this. You have to go and figure out what process works in the particular given group, for the particular given group of people. And then you need to measure You need to measure, you need to set the goals that are actually achievable. And based on that, you execute. It doesn't make a difference, at least in my experience. I shouldn't say that. It does make a difference. But the model is still going to be very much the same. There is one interesting peculiarity. You always need to understand what was the original goal for a particular, if you establish a development center, for example, and where was this development center in terms of the current talent level and current talent evolution. Again, let me give you an example. We established 2 development centers in Africa about 2 years ago. And if you go to Africa and you try to go and hire the computer science graduates or computer science engineers with the same expectations as you do in Silicon Valley or Redmond, you're not going to succeed because the experiences of people are different. People spend a lot of time focusing on the full stack development or on the app tier or on the solutions versus focusing on the frameworks and underlying infrastructure. Does it mean that people are not as talented? Absolutely not. Just people had different set of experiences. So when you are setting up goals, you need to understand what goals you are setting up in the particular area, given the current level of experiences. And based on that, pivot the ownership, pivot the deliverables for the teams. Because otherwise, if it's one size fits all, you're not going to succeed.
No, that's I think that's a very valid argument, and it's a difference of exposure. You have aptly put it. It's really not the talent; it's the difference of exposure and the conditions they were subjected to. So, which has led to a certain skill level, and you have to make sure that you give them something which matches their skill level and build that skill level up instead of comparing it with someone else. So I think that's a perfect comment. But I mean, in your experience, have you noticed that people who were working with you before pandemic within the office, now that they have gone remote or they've gone distributed, their performance levels have changed positively or negatively? Have you experienced anything like that?
So I don't think there is a huge deviation. It's going to be different from person to person. I'd say that working with home, and I'm being specific, it's with, not at, because it makes so much harder compared to working at home when we go for 1 day or 2 days in a month, had changed drastically how we work. I'm not sure if you experienced it yourself or not, but for us, I would say Microsoft Teams, and you obviously use Zoom, had become a great equalizer from the inclusion perspective of how meetings are getting to a lot more inclusive state. And it was a shock for us to see first hybrid meeting probably about 3 months ago, when we had number of people in the room, number of people on Teams, and it was drastically visible how different the energy and conversation is between the people in the room, even though everyone had the laptop in front of them with the camera on, etc. And that's still ways for us to go and figure out and fix. So I would say that with COVID, we became a lot more inclusive from the engagement perspective. COVID also had given us a lot of freedom on the work hours. And it's not freedom because people just randomly want to go and pick. It's freedom to go and accommodate personal needs. I'll give you another example. I'm right now in Chicago, and I could never expect that I would work for 3 weeks from Chicago 3 years ago, because all of my peers are in Redmond, and bulk of the team is in Redmond, and I would have been expected to be in Redmond. Right now, for me, being in Chicago is not a problem at all. So I think COVID changed that for a foreseeable future. There are other interesting aspects. The work hours for people had went up. And it's not a good thing per se. People spent a lot more work in front of the computers, or if they managed to get to the office, in the offices. But I would say one item I'm observing is that everyone is struggling to some degree with ingenuity, because the teams that were built to be in the office teams, they're used to corridor conversations, they're used to the whiteboard conversations, where everyone jumps on the whiteboard, not everyone, but 3 people, and they come up with the idea. They come up with something new, and we are lacking. We haven't built the skills like this for the teams that used to be in office teams. Teams that started as a remote teams, they don't have this problem, because for them from the get-go, that was the expectation, that you don't have the luxury of coming into the small conference room and whiteboarding on the whiteboard. When I started my remote teams in the past, we did it online from the get-go, and that was a norm, right? When you have that as a norm, it's easier. Anyway, I think I'm going too far. I'll pause and let you ask your next question.
That's perfectly fine, and that is actually also kind of triggered the next question, that because as you mentioned that probably it was a lot easier that people get together, jumped on a whiteboard, do something, and then all this remote thing happens. How it has really changed the leadership style. I mean, so we used to be in a single office, and we used to meet people, and there could be a lot of talk, not just the one-on-one meetings, but informal talks, and where you can have a lot of cues from the body language, and there could be softer side to it. And then now that we just see each other potentially on Zoom and very less physically, so has it changed the leadership style? Has it changed anything that when it comes to personal relationship, the emotional part of it, or the softer side of it, in your opinion?
The good managers, I think, became a lot more mindful about the connection. And the bad managers are getting helped to be more mindful about the connections. Because in the past, as you pointed out, you didn't have to think about it. Now you need to go and embrace the deeper need to connect with people. When we went on COVID, I think the second week after the lockdown, and we got on lockdown in March of last year. So it's been a long time for us. Starting second week, we actually started doing online all hands every month. And not all hands from the perspective of projecting what the product looks like, how the customer engagement works, etc. But all hands from the perspective of come and talk to ask questions of the leadership team, engaging team to go and participate wider. And that had been a very positive experience based on all of the feedback we've gotten so far. So this kind of engagements helped to go and bootstrap the conversations that we haven't had before. For example, for us, all hands were twice a year. Right now, we are, I think, back to the quarterly model, but at the beginning, getting to every month, talking to people in that way. Actually, I take it back, every 2 weeks. And that's how we started. And then slowly we went to every month. Helped a lot. For my team, I have direct engagements with all of my leads on the weekly basis. I go to their leads on the regular cadence, and it's always on the schedule. So I will go and walk around to make sure that it happens, that we have this opportunity. And you and I have a camera soon. That's unfortunately not a culture yet at Microsoft. So majority of people are still going to be coming on the call with the camera off. You see that my background is not a real background, it's a picture background. Right. Starting from the COVID, I try to get it more interesting for people, because I would change everyday background to another picture that I made over the years, and people would guess where that place was, which actually managed to get some of the people to start turning the cameras on. It's hard for me personally. I hate phones. Without seeing a person, it's very hard to have a conversation for me personally. And this is why I'm trying to get others to embrace cameras as much as possible, because it gives visual cues. It gives you a little bit of the additional feedback on how the other person is doing.
Right. So Igor, we talked about culture, performance, leadership, and I'm sure there are maybe many more aspects to it. But in the interest of time, I'll just try to wind this up. I mean, is there a framework, I mean, with your kind of experience, that one can leverage while building a remote distributed team, that one has to do the step 1, 2, 3, 4, or at least be very, very mindful of these steps to make sure they have a very successful distributed team? Is there a framework that you have in your mind, or you just do it naturally?
So I would say it's, again, highly dependent on the particular case, and it's going to be different from case to case. But there are some of the basic rules, in my opinion. You need to understand the needs, and you need to understand the goals when you're going on the particular endeavor. If you're opening a particular geo center somewhere, what is the goal? Are you trying to achieve the extra penetration into the talent market? Are you trying to do something else? If you're doing a pure geo distribution across the globe, what are you trying to achieve? So it starts with honesty to yourself and honesty to the people that you hire on what the goals are. If you already have the established team, is team ready for the change? You need to assess that. That's one of the most important items. It's probably also the one that is gonna destroy any projects if team is not ready for the change. If you think team is ready for the change, who are your change agents? The best way to go and change team from one way to another is to have change agents on the team that are gonna go and pioneer these efforts and are gonna support you. Because if it's just you pushing for that, it's probably highly unlikely to succeed. The other interesting aspect is to clearly realize that what worked for people of 100, local 100, is not going to work for the team of 100 that is geo-dispersed. What worked for a team of 100 that geo-dispersed is not going to work for a team of 1,000 that is geo-dispersed. So that is one of the interesting appreciations that everyone have to have. There is a good book called What Got You Here Won't Get You There by Marshall Goldsmith. It's about your career, but it's highly applicable to these particular cases as well. So I would say that these are probably the top of mind items that I would think of, but then you go and couple it with clear goals and clear tracking and accountability. You have to go and set up the goals, and the goals that do not have to be only I'm going to build this project or this phase of the project. The goal can be as I'm going to go and bootstrap the team in the particular area, and I'm going to get it to this level of experience. That's how I've done it with some of the geo centers in the past. Back in years with my local city where there was no talent, I had to go and cultivate the talent. I had to go and engage with the universities, and it took time. Similarly with Africa development centers, where there are expectations of taking extra time to get it to where we needed to get to.
Sure. So what we are hearing is that really you have to define goals, make sure that you communicate them to your team, and be mindful of the culture, and make sure that you keep the team aware of the culture, and then have this feedback around accountability, ownership that can make everyone work. So yeah, I guess these are the advices that we would have used in the normal world as well, but all the more important in this virtual or remote world. So my last question: do you think this is going to stay forever, like this distributed team? We all understand that some form of it maybe, but you feel that people are looking for more and more distributed and remote work, or they would like to come back to office ever? Or how would you like it in the future?
I think it's going to be hybrid, in my opinion. I don't think it's going to be one way or another. People are social creatures, so majority of people actually do want to go and have a direct interactions, and it's hard to have a direct interactions across Zoom or Teams. It's subpar. At the same time, we've all understood over the last 18 months that there is so much more opportunity for us, and more opportunity beyond our regular models of the past, where we just have centers of gravity across the globe. For example, I have California, Israel, Africa, Ireland, Atlanta, Reston, Virginia, and Redmond, obviously, as my geo-local centers. But I also have people present across the globe. And it's more of the happenstance, and across the globe, from China to Greece to United States, where they are one-off distributed. So for us, one-off distribution was a happenstance, just because people needed to move. And it became more and more during the pandemic, because right now, especially in the United States, we have I would say probably 70% of new hires over the last 18 months not being in the Redmond. And majority of them probably are not going to come to Redmond ever because they are happy living with their families. And we've managed to build the relationships within the teams to work this way. But it's not going to replace, one is not going to replace another, in my opinion. It's going to be an interesting mix, and we'll have to learn as we go. There is no yes or right or no answer here.
No, absolutely. I also think that it's going to stay some form of it. So it's going to be a hybrid culture, hybrid kind of teams. Some of them will be in office, some of them will be offshore. And I also believe that we are at the very beginning of evolving even models of building and working with these remote teams. I mean, even in our organization, we have hired hundreds of people during this pandemic time who we have never met. I mean, have never been to our office, and we've just hired them remotely, and they're working with us remotely. So yeah, and it's working out good. In some cases, there are fitting in or gelling in kind of stuff. But I feel that tools are going to evolve, our leadership, our team methodologies are going to evolve, but this is going to stay over here. So that's also my feeling. So again, thank you very much for being with us today. I think we kind of casually touched upon a topic that has become all the more relevant these days. And I guess I'll definitely grab you for another episode where we talk more about the engineering side. I feel that you have a very deep engineering side to you as well, and we need to talk about that as well. So, but thank you very much for being with us today on this podcast, and great to hear your views about that.
Oh, thank you for having me over, and looking forward.